This is the last part of GS3 Internal Security Marathon for UPSC CSE Mains 2026. In this part 4, we will discuss chapter 12, that is regarding Northeast relations, Northeast occurs, Manipur and Myanmar, etc. And then chapter 13, we will discuss about AI, space and emerging technology. And chapter 14, we will discuss economic security and strategic resilience. In the final chapter, we will discuss about forces, agencies, and the law. So, in this part, the first chapter is chapter number 12, that is the Northeast insurgency occurs and the Myanmar frontier. So, what is the Northeast? What are the problems related to Northeast? What are the occurs related to Northeast? One question asked in 2025, but still unavoidable in 2026. So UPSC asked Northeast directly in Mains 2025 regarding challenges and a mapping of the peace occurs of the past decade. The record says the same question rarely repeats immediately. So why is this still a full chapter? For that, three reasons. The India-Myanmar border subtheme has its own PYQ lineage 2019 and 2020, and it is burning with current developments. The occurs you will map here are the finest case study bank in the entire internal security paper, usable in conflict resolution, federalism, and border questions alike. And the heaviest syllabus head, that is border area security, runs straight through this region. So master it once, deploy it everywhere. So why insurgency survived here so long? Why? Why insurgency served here so long? The 2017 PYQ asked exactly this. Build the answer from geography outward. First of all, comes to the region. The region is 8 states, just under 8% of India's area. 3.78% of its population, more than 200 ethnic groups with distinct languages and identities. So, what is the border distinction? What is the border? Comes to the data anchor part. 5,484 kilometer of international border with Bangladesh 1880 kilometer, Myanmar 1643 kilometer, China 1346 kilometer, Bhutan 516 kilometer, Nepal 99 kilometer, according to the Minister of Home Affairs Annual Report 2024 and 2025. Nearly the entire region is frontier. Now the survival factors are as a chain, terrain, first and foremost, that is terrain, hills, forest, riverine belts that shelters in insurgency, porous borders, safe havens and camps in neighboring countries, which the annual report itself names as the nesting ground of Indian insurgent groups, and ethnic complexity, identity movements fragmenting into armed factions, and rivalries between communities acquiring armed form, and historical grievance comes to language, migration, control over land and local resources, and development deficit. What is development deficit here? Distance, real and felt from Delhi, and the economics of insurgency, extortion networks that gave armed groups a business model, not just a cause. So, insurgency survived in the Northeast at the intersection of terrain that shelters, borders that leak, identities that fragment, and grievances that fester, no single cause explanation survives contact with this region. That is why insurgency survived so long. I am repeating it again. Why insurgency survived so long? Due to terrain, difficulty terrain that shelters, and porous borders, ethnic complexity, historical grievances, development deficit, extortion as business model. These are all the causes for insurgency survived so long. So, what is the turnaround in numbers? The transformation, insurgency incidents down 64% in 2024 compared to 2014. Security force casualties down 85%. Civilian deaths down 86%. Incident count 824 in 824 in 2014, 294 in 2024. Surrender waves track the occurs. 2696 cadres in 2020, 2023 in 2022, 975 in 2024. Bodo numbers as different measures. 4881 is the cadre strength surrender under the accord itself. 2696 the region wide surrender count recorded for the year. And the supplies, the rise in 2023-24 numbers is primarily due to ethnic strife in Manipur. Manipur alone accounted for 226 of this region's 294 incidents in 2024. That is 77%. Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Sikkim and Tripura remained by large peaceful. Sikkim and Mizoram are insurgency free. So, a regional insurgency has collapsed into one state's ethnic crisis plus residual pockets. So, the chapter's analysis flows from that shape. So, here the occurred map we are going to discuss next. The turnaround, reducing, then the occurred map, a decade of settlements. Here is the exact mapping the 2025 PYQ demanded and your case study bank for years. Learn it as a dated sequence. Dates are the proof of preparation. So, August 2019 LFT 88 cadres 100 core Tripura package, and Jan 2020 Brew Riang covering 6935 families agreement for resettlement at 12 quadripartite locations in Tripura reported complete in the annual report. Provision raised to 793 crore. And January 22 2020 Bodo occurred, September 2021 Karbi Anglang, March 2022 Assam Meghalaya, and September 2022 Adivasi groups. January 2020 Bodo occurred, 4881 cadres, NDFB factions, ABSU surrendered, NDFB UBPO disbanded, 1500 crore package, and September 2021 Karbi Anglang occurred 1926 cadres, 1000 crore, 5 groups, and March 2022 Assam Meghalaya, 6 of 12 disputed areas boundary MOU settled, and September 2022 Adivasi groups occurred, 1182 cadres, 1000 crores, 8 groups. April 2023 Assam Arunachal 123 disputed villages boundary MOU settled as final, and April 2023 DNLA occurred, Dima Hasao 181 cadres. November 2023 UNLF agreement, first valley based Manipur Metis armed group to enter the mainstream peace monitoring committee, and December 2023 ULFA Protox 80 52 852 cadres faction occurred and disbanded, Jan 2024. Assam 5000 crore Ulfa 1 remains outside, and March 2024 Tipra Mota agreement, joint working committee Tripura on indigenous rights. September 2024, NLFT and ATTF occurred 918 cadres, 35-year Tripura conflict closed with 250 crore. So these are all the occurred maps till 2019 to 2022, then 2023 to 2024. So now extract the pattern here because a list is memory, but a pattern is marks. Note first that these are not all one category. Insurgent group occurs, rehabilitation agreements, boundary MOUs, and political agreements sit in one table, across them a working pattern. What is that working pattern? The settlements pair surrender with a development package. Peace is purchased with a future, not just as an amnesty. They include interstate boundary settlements because state versus state friction fed community versus community conflict. They reach previously distant actors. The Protox Ulfa faction after 4 decades of conflict, while Ulfa I stays outside, and a valley based Metis group for the first time, and they are enforced through committees and monitoring, not just signatures. So the Northeast peace model has four working parts. First one, negotiated surrender, a funded development package, boundary dispute settlement, and institutional monitoring. It is conflict resolution as a repeatable template applied across a dozen piece rehabilitation boundary and political agreements in 6 years. So we are moving to the next scene, that is unfinished file, the Naga question. What is the Naga question? One settlement remains conspicuously absent from the table, that is the Naga file. In four sentences, the NSCN split in 1988 into the Isaac Muvia and Kaplang factions. A ceasefire with the NSCN IM has held since 1997, extended indefinitely since 2007. The framework agreement of 3rd August 2015 promised a final settlement whose contents remain unresolved. Multiple factions are under ceasefire. The Myanmar based factions of NSCNK remain active, and spillover insurgency touches Tirap, Changlang, and Langding in Arunachal Pradesh. So, this is the thing regarding Naga file, and comes to the exam point. What is the exam point? The oldest insurgency is the one where an accord exists on paper, but peace remains unconverted. A standing reminder that signing is not settling. The oldest insurgency is the one where an accord exists on paper, but peace remains unsolved or remains unconverted. A standing reminder that signing is not settling. So then we are moving to next scene, that is Manipur. What is happening in what happened in Manipur? The distinction that organizes your answer. Manipur demands one precise analytical distinction. What began on the 3rd May 2023 is primarily ethnic strife, violence between the Metis and Kuki communities, which then re-energized the insurgency ecosystem around it. Ethnic conflict and insurgency are entangled in Manipur, but they are not the same phenomenon, and answers that merge them read as unprepared. The central response here is from the occurred progressive deployment of CAPFs and Army or Assam Rifle columns, a unified command structure, helicopters and drones for monitoring, the Home Minister's extended engagement, including over 100 civil society interactions, a commission of inquiry under a retired Chief Justice, relief and rehabilitation packages of 824.78 crores, the imposition of President's rule on 13th February 2025, extended once through Parliament and then its revocation on 4th February 2026, with an elected government restored under a new Chief Minister and significantly two deputy chief ministers drawn from the Kuki, Jo and Naga communities. Power sharing itself deployed a reconciliation instrument. One further dimension, because the conflict was fought online as much as on the ground. Manipur's dedicated police social media monitoring cells rose from 3 in 2020 to 16 by 2024. An expansion that took place in a state where the internet was suspended for roughly 140 days during the 2023, as far as BPRD data on police organization is concerned. According to that, hold both halves of that. The state was simultaneously shutting the network down and building the capacity to watch it. So read it as the information front of chapter 4, arriving inside a domestic ethnic conflict, and as the honest illustration of why blanket shutdowns are a blunt instrument. They suspend the rumor and the rebuttal together, and they blind the monitoring capacity the state has just finished building. The analytical closing for Manipur is, it is the region's warning label. Ethnic fault lines can reopen faster than insurgencies close, and a peace built on occurs with armed groups still requires peace between communities. This is all regarding about Manipur ethnic strife, not insurgency, entangled but not the same phenomena. So then we are moving to AFSPA. What is AFSPA? AFSP, AFSPA. Withdrawal as a confidence measure, the AFSPA debate, its sections, the human rights critique, the Supreme Court's position belongs to chapter 15. Here carry the footprint and its meaning. AFSPA applicability as on April 1st, 2025, according to MHA Annual Report 2024-2025, Arunachal Pradesh, 3 districts plus 3 police stations of one more, and Assam, 3 districts, Nagaland, 9 districts plus 21 police stations of 5 others, Manipur revoked from 13 police stations of 5 districts in force elsewhere. Completely revoked places Tripura and Meghalaya. Note that this is the current disturbed area map, not a list of every peaceful state. Mizoram and Sikkim carry no AFSPA notifications at all. The argument the footprint makes, AFSPA withdrawal has become one of the state's own confidence indicators. Lifted where peace consolidates, retained where it has not. The legal and political considerations also shape each notification. Read the disturbed areas map as one indicator of the peace process, not its sole measures. So then we are moving to the Myanmar frontier, the live sub question. This is most important for 2026. If the Northeast produces a 2026 question, this border is its most probable engine. 2019 and 2020 both asked it, and events have moved since. The frontier 1643 km, Arunachal 520, Nagaland 215, Manipur 398, Mizoram 510. The challenge set here, insurgent camps and cross-border movement, narcotics from the Golden Triangle proximity, the drug engine behind the 2018 PYQ, arms trafficking, ethnic kinship spanning the border, which turns any regulation into a social question, and instability across the frontier, pushing displacement into India. The policy response here from the record, the Cabinet Committee on Securities in Principle approval on 13th March 2024, and the scope is worth quoting, that is because it shows the scale of what has been undertaken rather than completed. 1610.2 kilometer of fence and road along the frontier at 20,026 4.4 crore over 10 years, plus 58 roads totaling 1467.5 kilometer to connect the Assam Rifles Company operating bases, and 6 approach roads of 78.7 kilometer, 10,000 crores to 31,000 crores in all. So this is based on Standing Committee on Home Affairs 252nd report, DFG 2025 and 2026. Against that sanction, the fence work actually awarded are in progress remains a small fraction, and saying so is the honest reading. So the completed 9 to 14 kilometer fence at More, hybrid surveillance system pilots in Arunachal and Manipur, and border roads advancing with the fence. And name the instrument in the question turns on, that is the free movement regime. The arrangement permitting people of either side to cross up to a set distance without a visa built in recognition of the kinship the boundary cuts through. Its status changed as the fencing decision advanced, and the successor arrangements is the live policy question on the frontier. So the debate you must present both sides of fencing and movement regulation promise interdiction of insurgents, drugs and arms, but they cut through communities whose kinship, markets and daily lifespan the line and the border states themselves are divided on it. Security infrastructure on this frontier succeeds only alongside, not instead of that consent of the borderlands people. So this is the first thing and live thing that is happening. The Myanmar frontier, what are the challenges? First and foremost, insurgent camps, narcotics, proximity to Golden Triangle, then arms trafficking, kinship across the line, and displacement, etc. Those are challenges. Further, the response by government of India, that is CCS approval, 1610 kilometer fence and road, awarded a small fraction, 9 to 9.21 kilometer, 214 kilometer at More, etc. Free movement regime, the live policy question in this frontier. Free movement regime. So the recruiting machinery, the standing instruments are, as far as Myanmar is concerned, the standing instruments, the recurring machinery compressed with figures, deployment, 463 CAPF companies on border guarding along the region's frontier, 640 companies on counter-insurgency, the SRE scheme, reimbursing states for security expenditure. The Northeast window runs from 1995, while Jammu and Kashmir window you met in chapter second runs from 1989, including honorarium to village defense committees and maintenance of designated camps for groups under suspension of operations. The financial plumbing of the peace process itself. The surrender come. Rehabilitation policy, revised 2018 4 lakh immediate grant held as fixed deposit, 6,000 monthly stipend for 3 years, weapon surrender incentives, vocational training, the individual level exit route that the occurs scale up to group level. And civic action programs, medical camps, schools, sports, the force owns hearts and minds instruments, same logic as chapter 2, different theater. The scene number 10, that is honest paragraph on the way forward, what remains unfinished. The Naga settlement signed in framework, unresolved in substance. Manipur, the ethnic wound beneath security statistics, residual actors, Ulfa, HNLC, Myanmar based NSCN factions, the border dilemma, security infrastructure versus borderland consent, the border dilemma, security infrastructure versus borderland consent, and the Akkad aftermath question this region shares with chapter 11 packages around announced must become development delivered or surrendered cadres drift toward crime and back toward grievance. So the way forward here is in one integrated paragraph, complete the unfinished settlements, deliver the packages with the same energy that signed them, heal Manipur through inter-community dialogue, not only administration, build the Myanmar border with the borderland, not against it, and let AFSPA's shrinking map continue to do what it has begun to do. Record district by district the conversion of a frontier of insurgency into a frontier of development. So, moving to the PYQ corner, that is final scene here. In 2025, asked challenges the occurs in the past decade. Question. In 2019, asked challenges across the Indian Myanmar border. And 2017 asked why armed insurgency survived. in this region. These three questions are asked since 2017 to 2025. So 2020 trans-border crimes along Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Pakistan borders that printed in full chapter 9 and directly answerable from chapters Myanmar material. So the probable question for mains 2026 here is security infrastructure along the India-Myanmar border must reconcile the imperative of counter-insurgency and narcotics interdiction with the realities of cross-border ethnic kinship examined in light of recent policy shifts. This is the probable mains 2026 question. So what is the answer should be? The region frame. Then explain survival. Terrain what is the survival? Terrain, border, identity, grievance chain. That comes under 2017 PYQ. Then establish the turnaround. 64, 85, 86 with the Manipur asterisk read honestly. Then move to the map the accords as a dated table, extract the four-part peace template, and then move to the distinguish Manipur's ethnic strife from insurgency, not the Naga file as the unfinished settlement, and then move to the close on the Myanmar frontier fencing and regulation versus borderland consent, and AFSPA shrinking map as one of the indicator of the peace. So this is the chapter 12, a dozen settlements, one warning, and a frontier still being written. This is all regarding about the northeast and challenges occurs etc. This is the important thing for mains 2026. The question regarding to Myanmar, that is the live topic. Then we are moving to next chapter, that is chapter number 13, that is artificial intelligence, space and emerging technology, security. So what is this? The double-edged chapter this is. Every technology in this chapter obeys one law. What is that law? Whatever multiplies your force multiplies your vulnerabilities. AI that watches your border can be poisoned, biased, or owned by someone else. Satellites that guide your missiles guide your adversaries and can be jammed. The navigation signal your ports, banks, and grids quietly depend on can be spoofed by a transmitter in a truck. This chapter has no direct PYQ on sisters. The closest is 2014 question on airspace and the law of the space above it, which means UPSC has left this territory fallow for over a decade while it became central to national security. Fallow territory plus fresh salience is the same setup that made chapter 3 a bet. This is technology version of that bet. So on thesis organization organizes everything. Dual use. Every capability here serves the hospital and the missile, the classroom and the spy op. Hold the thesis. Every scene applies it. Then moving to the scene number 2, that is AI as a force multiplier. First and foremost, what AI genuinely offers security, the positive ledger we are going to discuss. Surveillance and awareness. Border and terrain monitoring, drone and satellite reconnaissance, facial recognition at mass gatherings, maritime domain awareness. This comes under awareness. Then analysis and prediction. Predictive threat analysis, terror network mapping, intelligence fusion across agencies, finding the pattern no human analyst could extract from the flood. These are comes under analysis part. Then moving to defense of systems. Cyber anomaly detection, chapter 6's recommendation delivered by AI. Financial fraud and mule account detection, chapter 7's machinery that is. And comes to the operations part. Logistics, optimization, decision support, and autonomous and semi-autonomous systems. And one sentence of this synthesis: AI security value is speed and scale. It watches more, correlates faster, and flags earlier than any human establishment can. So AI as force multiplier, we are discussing the positive side. What what AI doing for us. What will be AI doing for us? Awareness, analysis, defense, and operations. Then we are moving to next scene, that is risk. AI is risk ledger. Six entries here. What are the six? Black box, foreign dependence, bias at scale, compressed decision time, dual use proliferation, and concentration and system risk. First and foremost, first one, the black box. AI outputs that cannot be explained or audited are dangerous exactly where stakes are highest. Target identification, threat classification, predictive policing. A system that cannot show its reasoning cannot be held accountable for its errors. And second one, foreign technological dependence. Dependence on foreign foundation models, cloud infrastructure, high-end chips and training data creates risk of strategic denial, surveillance, data extraction and embedded vulnerability. The weaponized interdependence of chapter 14 in silicon. Third one, bias and false positives. Biased systems misidentify individuals, target communities unfairly, and generate faulty intelligence. And AI scale, a small bias becomes a mass injustice that also destroys the legitimacy. Security work depends on. And chapter 3 is proliferating, profiling warning automated. Then fourth one is compression of decision time. AI accelerates crisis decisions to speeds where human verification thins, escalation risk rises, and accidental retaliation becomes conceivable. Machines are fast, wars started by mistake are faster. And fifth one, dual use of proliferation. The same model that serves healthcare and governance generates deepfakes, malware, propaganda, and autonomous targeting. Capability diffuses, intent does not have to. And the final thing, that is concentration and systemic risk. The economic surveys addition here, AI infrastructure concentrated in a few companies, clouds, chip makers, and countries is a systemic vulnerability. And heavily leveraged AI and data center investment carries financial stability risk, a correction interacting with geopolitical stress cloud cascade, technology risk and financial risk and one portfolio. So comes to the data anchor, the surveys AI risk ledger economic survey 2025 and 2026. Concentration in design. The United States, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan together account for 79.4% of global semiconductor integrated circuit design revenue. The cutting edge of chip design sits in a handful of countries. And concentration in infrastructure. Over 70% of world's data centers are located in high income countries. India generates nearly 20% of world's data, but hosts about 3% of global data centers, roughly 150 of 11,000. The build out. India's data center capacity is projected to reach about 8 gigawatt by 2030 from about 1.4 gigawatt in mid 2025. The financial risk part. Named the survey flags that technology companies moved more than 120 billion US dollar of data center spending off balance sheet through special purpose vehicles, and that the recent phase of highly leveraged AI infrastructure investment rests on optimistic execution timelines, narrow customer concentration, and a long duration capital commitments. A correction it once could tighten financial conditions and spill into broader capital markets. And the survey's sharpest formulation, which belongs in any answer that reaches this far, it assigns a 10 to 20% probability to a scenario of system shock cascade in which financial, technological, geopolitical stresses amplify one another rather than unfolding independently. With macroeconomic consequences, it judges could be worse than the 2008 global financial crisis. So read what that does to this chapter's thesis. Dual use is usually taught as a technological problem. The same tool serves the hospital and the missile. The survey adds a second axis. The same investment boom that builds India's compute sovereignty it itself a systemic financial exposure. Technology risk and financial risk or one portfolio and a security paper that notices this is reading the survey as the survey intents. One further note that survey makes on the governance side, absent on minimal regulatory clarity, can itself create systemic risk as AI enters healthcare, education, governance, and finance. So the question for India is framed not as whether to regulate, but how and when. That is the sentence to use in scene number 4. Artificial intelligence is simultaneously a force multiplier and a strategic vulnerability. A strategic vulnerability, opaque in its decisions, foreign in its foundations, biased at scale, and faster than the human judgment that must remain accountable for it. So this is AI risk ledger comes under according to the economic survey 2025-2026. So moving the scene number 4, that is governing the machine, the safeguard set. The response, organize it as three commitments: keep the human sovereign, start sovereign, use disciplined. Three commitments comes to human sovereign. Human in the loop control for all consequential decisions, non-negotiable. And first, auditable, explainable systems, read team testing before deployment, algorithm accountability and clear liability for failure, and support for international norms against fully autonomous lethal decisions, and keep the stack sovereign. An indigenous AI stack for sensitive sectors, models, secure compute, datasets, diversified semiconductor supply, resilient cloud and data center architecture. Chapter 6 is asset and secure public datasets because the model is only as trustworthy as its food. Keep the use of disciplined, keep the use disciplined. Procurement standards, sector specific safeguards, classified data protection, a military AI doctrine, so adoption is governed, not improvised. And data protection under the chapter 7 framework, where the citizens information trains the machine. So these are all under the governing mission, three commitments in order of priority. Then we are moving to invisible use utility, that is the scene number 5, and the machinery. The invisible utility, positioning, navigation, and timing. Now lift your eyes to orbit and start with what most people never see. What is this? Spatial infrastructure means positioning, navigation, and timing systems. GPS, India's Navic, and their global peers, plus communication satellites, remote sensing, and geospatial intelligence. Security applications in one sweep, troop movement and border surveillance, target acquisition and drone navigation, maritime domain awareness, chapter 10's picture, search, rescue, and emergency response, secure communications, including satellite based messaging, and the one nobody writes, you have to write it, timing. Financial transactions, telecom networks, and power grid synchronize on satellite time, disrupt the timing signal, and you disrupt the critical infrastructure of chapter 6 without touching a single cable. The strategic problem is dependence on foreign constellations means hostile access to you for a precision geolocation, and exposure to denial in crisis, which is the entire strategic case for NAVIC indigenous receiver chips and military grade encrypted services. And the name of the and name the machinery because India's vulnerabilities invites institutions. The India AI mission funded 1000 crore in budget 2026-2027 alongside a distinct budget head for technology in national security 9800 crores in the 2026-2027 estimates against 31631 crore in the revised estimates of 2025-2026. A dedicated line item itself an argument. What is that argument? Technology has become a security expenditure category, not merely an enabler. On the space side, NAVIC as the sovereign constellation. The Defense Space Agency approved in September 2018 at the Combined Commanders Conference and operational from 2019, headquartered at Bengaluru under Headquarters Integrated Defense Staff, drawing personnel from all three services and absorbing the defense imagery processing and analysis center and the defense satellite control center with a defense space research agency approved in June 2019 for the underlying technology. Its working material is signals, electronic and communication intelligence plus space-based surveillance and tracking, and it is described as a downsized first step toward a full space command rather than the finished article. And in space and in space as the regulator through which private and commercial space capability now enters the picture, which matters here because scene 7 dual use problem arrives through the exactly that door and give the capability a date because an examiner rewards one. In March 2019, Mission Shakti destroyed a satellite in low Earth orbit using a DRDO ballistical missile defense interceptor, placing India among the handful of states with demonstrated anti-satellite capability. The Defense Space Agency followed within months, and in July 2019, India ran in SpaceX its first simulated space warfare exercise under the Integrated Defense Staff, conducted expressly to assess threats in and inform a joint space doctrine. So, India's military space assets. India operated about 9 military satellites as of 2024, of which only a few are dedicated military platforms, principally GSAT-7 for the Navy and GSAT-7A for the Air Force. The rest are dual purpose. GSAT-7B, the Army's first dedicated satellite, was cleared in 2023 with a contract of about 2,963 crore. Under the space-based surveillance program, some 52 surveillance and communication satellites are planned between 2025 and 2029. What are the exercises here? Indo SpaceX in July 2019, and Antariksha Abhiyan first conducted by Headquarters IDS in November 2024 to war game threats to and from space-based assets. So, read the first line against Chapter 6 Cable and Data Center scene. 9 satellites is a small number for a country of this size running this match critical infrastructure on space derived timing, and the 52 planned is the state's own assessment of the gap. That is the sovereignty argument in two figures. And note the direction of travel the planning documents describe a layered constellation across low, medium, and geostationary orbits drawn explicitly from the lessons the war in Ukraine, the first conflict in which commercial space services became decisive, which is scene 7's problem arriving in a procurement plan. Now, the analytical point is which is more valuable than fact. A kinetic ASAT asset is a weapon of limited usefulness, and the reason in is debris. Destroying a satellite in orbit scatters fragments that endanger your own assets and everyone else's for years. That make it a weapon of last resort and a poor instrument of routine deterrence, which is exactly why the serious capability contest has moved to the reversible instrument of scene number 6, jamming and spoofing, and to space situational awareness. Say that, and you have explained why India's ASAT test mattered strategically while conceding the ASAT missiles are not where space warfare will actually be fought. And the doctrinal signal which has now landed, the Giant to military space doctrine was released on 16 September 2025 at the Combined Commanders Conference held at Army Eastern Command Headquarters, Fort William, a doctrine for multi-domain operations in the same pipeline. Released, not expected. Space has been brought inside the giant warfighting framework rather than left as a support service, and that is the institutional expression of chapter's dual use thesis. And comes to the navigation warfare. that is jamming and spoofing. The attack on the signal integrated here, not a separate lesson. Jamming drowns the signal denial. Spoofing counterfeits it, receives to calculate a false location, direction, speed, or time. The consequences ladder here: aircraft deviation and ship misdirection, drone hijacking, military confusion and false tracking, and the timing attack again, disruption of financial and telecom synchronization. The counter set is what? Multi constellation receivers, no single point of signal failure, Navic integration as the sovereign layer, inertial navigation backups. The ship must know where it is even when the sky lies. Signal authentication and anti spoofing algorithms, spectrum monitoring, and civil military incident reporting. Because a spoofed airliner and a spoofed warship are one incident picture. So dual use in orbit. This is the scene number 7. The blurred line in orbit, the thesis of scene 1 reaches its sharpest form in orbit. Modern satellites are dual use by construction. The same constellations carry navigation, weather, internet, and civilian communications, and reconnaissance, targeting data, and military communications. Military increasingly ride commercial constellations for redundancy, cost, and resilience. The security consequences: civilian satellites become potential military targets, and when a shared constellation is attacked, civilian harm is built into the strike. Attribution is hard. Jamming, spoofing, and cyber attack on satellites carry the chapter number 5 problem into orbit. And the law is unready. Space law and international humanitarian law never anticipated commercial constellations serving armies mid conflict. The distinction between civilian object and military objective, on which the law of war rests, blurs at arbitral velocity. The 2014 airspace PYQ asked about the law about national airspace a decade later. This is that question matured. The measure set: secure by design satellites, anti-jamming, anti-spoofing, and signal authentication, resilient terrestrial backups, space situation, space situational awareness, separation and redundancy for essential civilian services, updated international rules for dual use constellations, and attributions cooperation with partners. So, three examples you have to carry as in one line: ammunition, not as chapters; GPS jamming incidents affecting civil aviation; fiber optic drones tethered by cable immune to jamming, the countermeasure to the countermeasure; and BGP hijacking, internet traffic rerouted at the protocol level for espionage or denial, proof that even the ground segment of the digital sky can be bent. The growing military reliance on commercial and dual use constellations strains the civilian military distinction on which the law of armed conflict rests. The principles of distinction and proportionality are settled. Their application to a satellite serving a hospital and an army in the same orbit is not. So, dual use in orbit we discussed so far. One is constellations, two users, then civil satellites as targets, and attribution we discussed in chapter number 5 in orbit. So, distinctions are settled. In orbital applications is not. Distinctions are settled, but it's in its orbital applications is not settled. So the honest paragraph is: the tensions to acknowledge indigenization takes years. Threats operate now. The transition itself is a vulnerability window. AI governance must restrain misuse without strangling the innovation that security also depends on. Surveillance capability built for threats can drift towards citizens. The oversight question is permanent, and every safeguard in this chapter assumes institutional capacity. Auditors, red teams, spectrum monitors that must be trained before it can be trusted. The way forward compressed into four verbs, that is indigenize, the AI stack, Navic ecosystem, receiver chips, secure compute, then authenticate, signals, models, data, and supply chains, then humanize. The human decision sovereign over every consequential machine, and harmonize international norms for AI weapons and dual use space before the incident writes the rules for us. And the forward looking clause is already built. Quantum, the harvest, now decrypt later, threat, and the post quantum migration sits at the end of the chapter 6, completing the technology arc this chapter extends. The final scene is PYQ corner. In 2014, asked what is airspace and the law of the space above it, the ancestor today's answers is dual. Today its answers is dual constellations. 2021 asked multi-dimensional challenges printed in chapter 4. The technology fronts of this chapter are those dimensions. This territory has lain fallow for over a decade while it became central to national security. Fallow territory plus fresh salience is the best chapter makes. The 2021 question, multi-dimensional challenges from external state and non-state actors, printed in full chapter in chapter 4. The technology fronts of this chapter are those dimensions. One printed question, and that is the honest picture. This territory has lain fallow for over a decade while it became central to national security. Fallow territory plus fresh salience is the best this chapter makes. The probable question for mains 2026. Artificial intelligence is simultaneously a force multiplier and a source of strategic vulnerability. Analyze its implications for India's national and internal security. Positioning, navigation, and timing infrastructure has become a strategic component of national security. Discuss India's vulnerabilities and importance of indigenous spatial infrastructure. And the third question is the growing military reliance on commercial and dual-use satellite systems has blurred the distinction between civilian infrastructure and military targets. Examine the security and legal implications. So the artificial intelligence, the answer is dual use frame. State the thesis. Every force multiplier is a vulnerability multiplier dual use as the growing law, organizing law. Then for AI, the positive ledger and then risk ledger, black box dependence, bias, time compression, proliferation, concentration. Then govern the machine. Human sovereign, stock sovereign, use discipline. Then go to orbit. PNT with the timing, inside navigation, warfare counter set, and the dual use satellite legal blur with the chapter 5 attribution link. Then close on the four verbs, that is indigenize, authenticate, humanize, harmonize with quantum as standing horizon. So this is the chapter number 13, the machine. The machine watches the frontier. Your answer watches the mission. And next chapter, that is 14th chapter, that is economic security and strategic resilience. The capstone positioned honestly. In chapter 4, we mapped hybrid warfare's four fronts and promised that the fourth, the economic front, would get its own chapter here. This is that chapter, and it is the marathon's conceptual capstone. Position it honestly because I position everything honestly with you. This head has never been asked directly under its own name, but it has ancestors in this paper and they matter more than most students realize. Twice in 2014 and again in 2018, UPSC put an economic corridor into the internal security paper and asked what threat is posed. And in 2013, it placed the phrase economic sovereignty in a money laundering question. Three times, the examiner has treated economics as a strategy inside this paper without even naming the doctrine. So the probability of a direct question is lower than for critical infrastructure or left-wing extremism, but it is not zero, and the ground has been prepared. Then why a full chapter? Three returns on your time. It is the premium enrichment layer. One paragraph of this material elevates answers in hybrid warfare, critical infrastructure, and financing. It double serves your economy paper, where weaponized independence and tied indigenization are highly askable, and it carries the single best conclusion framework in your entire GS3 preparation. Waiting in scene 8. The source is authoritative. The Economic Survey 2025-2026, whose broader argument is that economic resilience has become inseparable from national security. Broader argument is what? Is that economic resilience has become inseparable from national security. So then move to weaponized interdependence. This is scene number 2. The world that has changed. Start with the changed assumption. The post-Cold War order often treated economic interdependence primarily as a source of efficiency and mutual restraint, like open markets, predictable rules, stable capital flows, and the working assumption that nobody attacks their own supply chain. That belief is weakening. Trade, finance, technology, and supply chains are increasingly shaped by security and political consideration. So the coercion toolkit now is in open use. Coercive tariffs, economic sanctions, technology denial, and export controls, supply chain manipulations, financial restrictions, and currency pressure, control over energy routes and critical inputs. So these are most important and running in this time, lifetime. And the core analytical insight is learn it as a sentence. Interdependence becomes a weapon when one country controls that others cannot do without. Critical technology, processing capacity, energy routes, payments architecture, finance, logistics, strategic raw materials. So interdependence, weaponized interdependence. So interdependence becomes a weapon when one country controls what others cannot do without. Critical technology, processing capacity, energy routes, payment architecture, finance, logistics, strategic raw materials. The dependence itself is the ammunition, which is why the survey's striking claim follows. Policy credibility, predictability, and administrative discipline are now strategic assets. Because in a weaponized world, being a country others can rely on itself a form of power. So, economic interdependence, once viewed primarily as a source of efficiency, is increasingly an instrument of geopolitical coercion. And every unexamined dependence is a pressure point waiting to be pressed. So, what is weaponized interdependency? We discussed so far. Nobody attacks their own supply chain. That belief is now weakening. Coercive tariffs, sanctions, technology denial, supply chain manipulation, financial pressure, and energy routes. So, interdependence become a weapon when when one country controls what others cannot do without. So that is interdependence become a weaponized one. So credibility and predictability are now strategic assets. So then we are moving to signature ladder three rungs. Now the framework that makes this chapter is yours. The three rung ladder that organizes the survey's argument. Learn all three rungs. Rung 1, import substitution. Produce domestically what was previously imported. Objective, reduce import dependence, necessary but only the floor. Then rung 2, strategic resilience, build buffers and capabilities so that essential systems keep functioning under stress. So geopolitical conflict, sanctions, supply disruption, pandemics, cyber attacks, energy shocks, financial crisis, these are all will overcome. Objective, continuity and adaptability of critical capacities. The breadth here is the note the breadth. The survey treats resilience as systemic, energy, food, health, data, defense, infrastructure, and technology, not merely domestic manufacturing. And rung 3, strategic indispensability. Embed Indian industries and technologies so deeply in global networks that other countries acquire a stake in India's stability and function. For what is the objective here is convert economic capability into geopolitical influence. So here three rungs we discussed in the ladder of signature framework. That is first thing, import substitution, strategic resilience, and strategic indispensability. These are important for continuity, dependence reduction, shock absorption, and global leverage. So these will useful. So your portable formulation is what? Dependence reduction, then lead to shock absorption, then lead to global leverage. And the sentence that binds it, national security increasingly depends not merely on producing domestically, but on securing critical system through diversification, redundancy, and global indispensability. Comes to supply chains part, the new domain of security. Where does resilience get built in supply chains? The surveys map is the vulnerable areas here. Recognize them as a set: energy, food and fertilizers, pharmaceuticals and active pharmaceutical ingredients, telecom equipment, semiconductors, battery materials, and rare earth magnets, industrial chemicals, power electronics, defense electronics, data and digital systems. These are all vulnerable areas. What are the toolkits here? Supply chain mapping, know your dependents before the adversary uses them, strategic stockpiling, dual sourcing and supplier diversification, friend shoring and trusted technology partnerships, selective reshoring, domestic processing of critical stages, redundancy planning, and R&D security. These will use for vulnerabilities. And the distinction that separates a mature answer from an autarkic one, that is five objectives drawn from the survey's argument. The goal is not to produce everything domestically, it is to ensure no single point dependency, available during crisis, rapid substitution when one source fails, control over critical stages of the value chain, and enough domestic capability to negotiate from strength. So the internal security translation here is supply chain disruption reaches military readiness, medical preparedness, power and telecom community, food stability, and through them public order itself. That is the bridge from the economy paper to this one. So what are the vulnerable areas in supply chains? We have to first of all find, and then what objectives, and then what are the measures to counter this. This is this discussed so far in this particular supply chain scene number for the new domain. So then we are moving to tied strategic indigenization. The discipline, if supply chain are the domain, indigenization is the instrument. And the survey's contribution is that it must be tied and not indiscriminate. Tier 1, non-negotiable, high urgency sectors, significant security or macroeconomic exposure with realistic near-term domestic capability, edible oils, pulses, fertilizer inputs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, power electronics, industrial chemicals, telecom equipment. For this approach, domestic scale up, demand assurance, public procurement alignment, time bound support. Then tier 2, strategic core. What is the strategic core sectors? Full self-sufficiency may be out of reach, but vulnerability must be reduced, like rare earth magnets, battery cells and cathodes, solar wafers and cells. What is the approach? supplier diversification, international partnerships, selective reshoring, technology learning, multiple sourcing. Connect to budget 2026-2027 here, but use the nomenclature that domestic documents actually carry. The budget provides 500 crore for activities under the National Critical Mineral Mission through the National Mineral Exploration and Development Trust Fund. If you use the phrase rare earth corridor, attribute it to the budget speech rather than to the budget documents. It does not appear in the expenditure statements, and a misattributed scheme name is the kind of error in examiner notices. So tier 3 comes to the tier 3 long horizon capability sectors. What are those sectors? Rail signaling, defense electronics, electrolyzers, advanced industrial systems. What is the approach for this? Co-engineering, test beds, procurement linked learning, talent and explicitly avoid premature localization mandates. And the survey warning, which is your balanced paragraph ready made. Poorly designed indigenization raises input costs and weakness downstream competitiveness. Strategic autonomy must be selective, disciplined, and export oriented, not protectionist. So, strategic indigenization must sit at the intersection of vulnerability, feasibility, and systemic importance. Indiscriminate localization does not buy security, it buys expensive insecurity. So, this is also most cautious thing. Tier 1, tired, not indiscriminate, non negotiable, strategic core, and legal origin. Selective, disciplined, not protectionist policy. Then we are moving to next scene, energy and minerals. The transition security clause, two applications, two applications of the framework that is compressed. Energy security, the vulnerabilities, import crude and gas, maritime choke points, chapter 10, geography price shocks, conflict disruption, and less obviously, the green transition zone dependence, imported solar components, battery material, mineral processing, concentrated in few countries, grid stability under rapid renewable integration. Comes to the service principle here, sequencing, climate ambition reconciled with affordability, reliability, industrial competitiveness, and strategic autonomy, storage, grid modernization, diversification, and strategic reserves as the enablers in the comes to the sequence and the climate ambition. Then comes to the critical, then minerals part, critical minerals, and the line that wins the question, that is India may reduce dependence on fossil fuels only to create new dependence on lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, rare earths, and foreign refining. The survey names it a transition vulnerability. The green transition may shift rather than eliminate strategic dependence from hydrocarbons to mineral and technology. Energy security is the 21st century is mineral security. The mineral response set, overseas mineral partnerships, domestic exploration, processing and refining capacity, recycling and urban mining, strategic stockpiles, substitution research, and domestic magnet and battery ecosystems. So, what we discussed in these two applications of the framework, that is energy and minerals. Energy and minerals. Comes to energy, imported crude gas and choke points, the transition's own dependency with grid stability sequencing. Comes to the minerals part, lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, rare earths materials. For this overseas partnership exploration, refine, refining, recycling stockpiles, and magnet battery ecosystem we have to create. Energy security is the 21st century is what? Mineral security. Then comes to the next scene, manufacturing as power. Manufacturing as power and the law that already agrees. Two closing planks of the framework. First one, manufacturing as a security asset. Manufacturing as a security asset. When supply of essential and infrastructure goods cannot be assured, manufacturing stops being merely an employment question. It's a security functions. Defense preparedness, assured availability of essential, reduced supply chain vulnerability, technological capability, external stability, crisis response capacity, and strategic bargaining power. Competitive manufacturing and exports converting economic size into influence. Rung 3 of the ladder operationalized with the same caution attached. Protectionism is not a strategic capacity. Tariff walls on upstream inputs can undermine the very resilience they claim to be built. And second one, and here the marathons thread tie together Indian law and institutions. Already treat economic security as security. UAPA chapters 1 anchor defines that terrorist acts to include in threats to India's economic security, disruption of essential supplies and services, and damage to monetary stability. And MHA's national security clearances regime 1117 proposals concluded in the reporting year explicitly evaluates economic threats in sensitive sector investments, investment screening as a standing security instrument. Economic security is not an academic framing. Economic security is not an academic reframing. Indian statute already lists attacks on economic security and monetary stability as terrorism, and investment screening already operates as a security instrument. The doctrine has arrived, the chapter merely names it. So comes to the state capacity, the conclusion framework for everything. Now the promised gift here usable to conclude answers in this chapter. In disaster management, in governance, in cyber, in counter terrorism. The survey's final argument is strategic resilience cannot be built by schemes and allocations alone. It requires state capacity, institutions able to act under uncertainty, coordinate across ministries, learn from implementation, and correct mistakes, withdraw failed support, anticipate crisis, mobilize the private sector, and execute its mission mode. So these are all the strategic resilience, and the weakness it names recognizable everywhere. Risk aversion, and proceduralism, fragmented accountability, punishment of honest failure, inability to withdraw, ineffective support, departmental silos rule, compliance mistaken for outcomes. These are all under weaknesses. The entrepreneurial state answer, three features entrepreneurial state answers: outcome oriented bureaucracy, failure tolerance, combined with institutional learning and credible withdrawal of unsuccessful support. And the conclusion line here is memorize it as written. Strategic resilience ultimately depends less on the number of institutions than on their ability to anticipate, coordinate, learn, and execute under uncertainty. That sentence can close a cyber answer, a disaster answer, a supply chain answer, and a counter terror answer. One line, four papers of service. Strategic resilience ultimately depends less number of the institutions than their ability to anticipate, coordinate, learn, and execute under uncertainty. So comes to the scene number 9, that is the distinction that ends the marathon's argument. One final formulation, the surveys and the survey and this module's parting frame, that is internal security protects the state from immediate threats, strategic resilience protects the functioning of the nation during prolonged systemic shocks. So chapter 1 to 13 built the first, this chapter built the second. The complete answer in the exam and for the country needs both. The honest paragraph briefly, indispensability is a decade scale project, not a scheme. Resilience spending competes with development spending and must be justified, not assumed. And the line between strategic protection and protectionism is easy to state and hard to hold, which is why the service discipline selective, tied, export oriented is a part of this chapter to remember when everything else fades. Comes to the PYQ part, the ancestors oblique but real. The 2018 CPEC question and 2014 China Pakistan corridor security threat and 2013 money laundering economic sovereignty. These questions asked in previously. The same corridor asked twice, 4 years apart. in the internal security paper. And in 2013, the rephrase economic sovereignty placed in this paper 12 years ago. Three times the examiner has treated economics as strategy here without ever naming the doctrine. This chapter names it. So comes to the probable mains question, that is strategic resilience requires diversification, redundancy and technological capacity rather than complete self-sufficiency. Discuss. In era of weaponized interdependence, strategic resilience requires diversification, redundancy, and technological capability rather than complete economic self-sufficiency. Discuss. And the second question is critical supply chains have emerged as an important dimensions of national security. Examine India's vulnerabilities and evaluate the need for tied strategic indigenization. And the third question, probability. India's transition from fossil fuels may replace energy dependence and critical mineral dependence. Analyze and suggest a strategy for mineral security. So in era of dependence, interdependence, era of weaponized interdependence, strategic resilience requires diversification, redundancy, and technological capability rather than complete economic self-sufficiency. Discuss. This question we have to write an answer like the ladder frame. First and foremost, establish the changed world like weaponized interdependence and its a coercion toolkit. Then deploy the ladder. In that, import substitution, then lead to strategic resilience, then strategic indispensability, then apply it to the asked domain, supply chains, energy, minerals, or manufacturing with the five objective distinction and the tied discipline, then ground it, UAPS, economic security class and investment screening, the doctrine already in law, then move to conclude with the state capacity, anticipate, coordinate, learn, execute, the one line close that serves every paper, and the marathons that in this way you have to write an answer. This is chapter number 4. The marathons 14 battles share one lesson, that is the strongest economic security combines domestic resilience with global relevance, absorbing shocks at home, creating durable stakes abroad, and that is built in the economy. The marathons 14 battles share one lesson. What is that lesson? The strongest economic security combines domestic resilience with global relevance, absorbing shocks at home, creating durable stakes abroad, and that is built in the economy. So then we are moving to next chapter, that is 15th and final chapter of internal security, that is security forces, agencies, and the legal framework. So the machinery chapter. 14 chapters have described threats and strategies. The closing chapter answers a simple question. What is that question? Who does the work and under what law? It is lean by design. This syllabus head has produced only 3 direct questions in 13 years, but each one demands precision. 2023 asked for the Central Intelligence and Investigative Agencies. 2019 asked for the UAPA and NIA Act amendments and the human rights opposition to them. 2015 asked which sections of AFSPA activists oppose and what the Supreme Court has held. Notice the pattern in those questions. Every one of them pairs the missionary with its critics. So this chapter's discipline is fixed from the start. For every power, the safeguard. For every statute, the debate. For every power, the safeguard. For every statute, the debate. That balance is not political caution. It is what examiner explicitly asked for. The agencies map, 3 columns. The 2023 PYQ answered an organized map that is 3 columns. Column 1, intelligence. Intelligence. Column 1, intelligence. Then investigation, then forces. Come to intelligence. The Intelligence Bureau of Internal Intelligence, the research and analysis wing for external, and the fusion layer built across this marathon, the multi-agency central grid, MAC at the center, and state MACs below Chapter 11's spine. Then NAT grid, connecting 11 central user agencies and the police of every state and union territory with 11 data providing organizations. The query layer over the nation's database. And CIMAC, the 2025 edition, atop the cyber stack from Chapter 6. Note also that a new multi-agency center facility was inaugurated in May 2025, explicitly framed as a single integrated platform across terrorism, extremism, extremism, organized crime, and cyber attacks. The fusion idea rebuilt rather than merely continued. And one instrument most candidates will not have, Bharat Poll. The CBI developed portal launched in January 2025, enabling cooperation with 195 countries and access to 19 categories of Interpol database for fugitive tracing and cross-border crime. It belongs to any answer on agencies and again in chapter 8's international limb. Then column number 2, that is investigation. The NIA, the premier central terror investigation agency under the NIA Act 2008, carrying the marathon's proudest anchor. Then comes to data anchor. 657 cases since inception, 521 charge sheeted, 150 convictions in 157 conclude trials, about 95%. Aggregate across the whole docket. Which scene 4 will be qualified with the TFFC cell and the dedicated left-wing extremism vertical inside it. And then comes to the Enforcement Directorate. PMLA's prosecutor, Chapter 8, the NCB for narcotics, the GBI were notified. Then comes to column 3, that is forces, the CAPFs, each with a one-line mandate, BSF, ITBP, SSB, and Assam Rifles holding the borders on the one border, one force principle. One border, one force principle. Chapter 9's map. CRPF as the internal security workhorse. The counter-insurgency deployments of chapters 11 and 12. CISF guarding critical installations, airports, and the Delhi Metro. Chapter 6's Chapter 6 physical layer. NSG as the counter-terror strike reserve, and the constitutional keel under it are state it once, and at it all state it once. Clearly, police and public order are state subjects. The state police officer is the first responder to every threat in this book. The center's role is capacity, coordination, and specialized capability. Every agency above supplements, none supplements the Tana. Moving to scene number 3, the digitized spine of criminal justice system. Criminal justice. The quiet revolution of most aspirants miss with numbers. The new codes arrived as software. The digital criminal system grid, CCTNS, the crime and criminal tracking network, operational across all 17,189 police stations covered by the national rollout. ICGS. ICGS, the interoperable criminal justice system linking the 5 pillars. Those 17,189 police stations, 3602 court complexes, 1317 prisons, 1,000 prosecution offices, and 105 forensic laboratories, with NIA, CBI, NCB, and others running person of interest searches across it. NAFIS, the National Automated Fingerprint Identification System, 1377 workstations commissioned. And on this grid, the transition to the new criminal laws, BNS, BNSS, and BSA, in force from 1st July 2024 was executed at system level. CCTNS patched nationwide. The eSaksha application for audiovisual crime scene evidence under Section 105 BNSS electronic FIR strengthened alongside the already established zero FIR principle. The NCRB Sankalan app, 8 lakh downloads, mapping old provisions to new, and SOPs from preliminary inquiry to directorate of prosecution. Comes to analytical point here is the new laws bet on technology enforced procedure, mandatory videography, electronic records, timelines tracked by system rather than the register. One further note for completeness. The BNS also brings a terrorism offense into the General Criminal Code, creating alongside UAPA a prosecutorial choice between the two statutes with different sanction requirements, investigating agencies and procedural consequences whose interplay courts and commentary are still settling. So India's criminal justice reform is running on rails already laid. One networked system from FIR to forensic report so that the new codes arrived not as books but as software. Then we are moving to next scene, that is UAPA, the power and the debate. The 2019 PYQ first half and its second, the statutes architecture assembled from this marathon. Proscription 45 terrorist organizations, 57 individual terrorists, 23 unlawful associations, a terrorist act definition reaching economic security and monetary stability. Chapters 1814 and section 51A powers to freeze and seize. The 2019 amendments. What changed? The power to designate individuals, not only organizations, as terrorists. Approval for property seizure in NIA cases vested on the NIA's own Director General and NIA officers of inspector rank empowered to investigate. The state's case organizations banned under the name re-registered under another individual designation follows the terrorist, not the letterhead. Seizure and investigation powers match the speed at which terror assets move, and the opposition's case, the PVQ demands it. Designation of individuals without trial inverts the presumption of innocence and carries civil death consequences. Definitional breadth risks application beyond terrorism score. The stringent bail standard combined with long trial timelines means process itself becomes punishment. And low conviction rates in the wider UAPA docket sharpen the concern. The balanced clause here is extraordinary threats justify extraordinary law, but extraordinary law survives with constitutional scrutiny only through narrow application, judicial oversight, and periodic review. Say all three limbs, that is the answer. So UAPA, the 2019 question, UAPA and the power and the debate. So what are the 2019 amendments? Individuals designated as terrorists, seizure approval with the NIA DG, Directorate General, inspector rank investigation, designation follows the terrorist. The oppositions are for this thing. Presumption of innocence inverted, definitional breadth, bail plus delay is punishment, low conviction rates, narrow application, judicial oversight, and periodic review. Then moving to next scene, that is NIA Act, the federal question. The NIA Act amendments and the federal question, the 2019 PYQ's companion statute. What the NIA Act amendments did: expand the scheduled offenses, human trafficking, counterfeit currency, cyber terrorism, arms and explosive offenses, conferred extraterritorial jurisdiction, investigating scheduled offenses against Indians and Indian interests abroad, and enabled faster designation of special courts. The strategic logic here is the offense set now matches this marathon's map. Trafficking, FICN, and cyber terrorism and cyber terror are terrorism's ecosystems. Chapter number 7 and 8. And terror against Indians does not stop at the border. The debate here is name it as federalism. Precisely, the NIA Act expressly empowers to the center to direct investigation scheduled offenses. So the tension is between statutory central jurisdiction and the federal placement of police and public order, not a simple case of legal overreach. For that working resolution, coordination protocols, concurrent jurisdiction in practice, and political economy of consent, imperfect, evolving. and worth one honest sentence in any answer, and carry the counter example because it is the sharper one. After 26 by 11, the government proposed a national counter terrorism center, a standing body to fuse intelligence and act on it, to be to be located with the intelligence within the intelligence bureau, and to carry powers of arrest and search under the unlawful activities prevention act. It was never operationalized. A block of chief ministers across party lines objected on two grounds, and both are examinable: that a body exercising powers of arrest inside a state was an intrusion into police and public order, which are state subjects, and that housing executive powers within an intelligence organization, one that is not a statutory body and answers to no parliamentary oversight committee, put coercive authority outside the accountability structures that ordinarily govern it. And proposals for a standing council of state anti-terrorism chiefs were floated as a compromise and went nowhere. So set the two cases side by side and you have the whole federalism argument in one paragraph. The NIA Act passed and the states absorbed it because Parliament legislated and the agency investigates. NCTC did not because it would have arrested. The line India's federal structure has actually drawn is not between center and state in the abstract. It is between central investigation, which has been accepted, and central executive police power, which has not. So what changed here? Scheduled offences expanded, extraterritorial jurisdiction, faster special courts, and central jurisdiction versus state subject. This is the discussion part. And then comes to NCTC, the counter example. Fusion plus arrest powers inside the IB. Never operationalized this is. Objections across party lines. Coercive power. Outside oversight. NIA investigates and passed. NCTC would have arrested and did not. NIA investigates and passed. So comes to the AFSPA. Next scene, that is AFSPA. The sections, the court, the calibration. The 2015 PYQ answered precisely, then updated. Which provisions do activists oppose? The section number 4. Why? The special powers to fire upon, even causing death against persons contravening prohibitory orders in a disturbed area, to arrest without a warrant, to enter and search without warrant, to destroy structures used by armed groups. So this is the section 4. And section 6, the sanction shield. No prosecution of personnel without central government sanction, which critics read as impunity in practice since sanction is rarely granted. What the Supreme Court has held: two markers. The Naga People's Movement judgment delivered in 1997. The court upheld AFSPA's validity but bounded it. Disturbed area. Declarations require periodic review. The army's own do's and don'ts were given binding force, and the powers must be exercised with minimum force and good faith. And in 2016 lines of cases on alleged extrajudicial killings, the court held there is no absolute immunity. There is no absolute immunity. There is no absolute immunity. Allegations of excessive or retaliatory force must be investigated. Uniform notwithstanding. The current affairs update that completes the answer, chapter number 12's scoreboard. AFSPA fully revoked in Tripura and Meghalaya. Progressively withdrawn district by district in Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, and Arunachal. One of the state's own confidence indicators, shrinking the last map as peace consolidates. So AFSPA debate is no longer repeal versus retain in the abstract. The calibrated district wise withdrawal underway It is itself the emerging answer. Extraordinary powers receding exactly as the extraordinary situation does. Extraordinary powers receding exactly as the extraordinary situation does. So here section 4, section 6 and the code 1997 and 20 to 16 said no absolute immunity, the shrinking gap. Then we are moving to next scene, that is the first responder. Closing where security begins. And the marathon missionary where every incident begins. The state police station. The center's declared role from the record. Capacity building of state police as first responders, training in intelligence collection, terror response and terror response and investigation, modernization support, and the specialized cadres this marathon has met, cyber commandos, OT security specialist, counter IED teams, marine police, each one an answer to the same diagnosis. The generalist constable cannot alone police a special century. The generalist constable cannot alone a police a specialist century. And the prosecution and forensic limb. Forensic capacity, the 105 laboratories on ICJS and new forensic evidence mandates of the criminal courts and the prosecution reform, because chapter 1's lesson stands at the end as at the start. Counter terrorism and all security is completed in the courtroom, not the encounter. Comes to the scene number 7A, that is mob violence. The failure the first respond is measured by the one question in this paper has no natural chapter, so it comes here. And the placement itself is the lesson. UPSC asked about mob violence in 2017 under the development and extremism head. But read the question's own first words, a serious law and order problem. A law and order problem is answered the machinery of law and order. That machinery is this chapter. The causes here is 5 layers and answer in layers, because most candidates will write only the first. The trigger layer. The trigger layer here is what? Rumor and manufactured provocation moving at platform speed. Chapter 3's machinery and chapter 4's information front turned inward on ourselves. The fault line layer, communal cost and identity divisions already present, waiting to be blamed, waiting to be inflamed. The rumor does not create the crowd, it finds one. The institutional layer, thin local policing, slow response, absent deterrence, a crowd assembles because nothing stops it assembling. The justice layer, delayed trials and uncertain conviction breeding the belief that crowd will delivers what the court will not. Every acquittal after a decade recruits the next mob. And the impunity layer, where perpetrators expect protection, violence become rational. The consequences and go past the obvious one, the immediate harm, death and injury failing disproportionately on minorities and the vulnerable. The communal harm, polarization and note precisely what that means. Chapter 1 listed Indians turning on Indians as terrorism own first objective. Mob violence achieves it without a terrorist. The institutional harm, the state's monopoly on force conceded in the one place the citizen can actually see it. And the harm to the rule of law itself. The rule of law itself, what? When the crowd convicts, the court becomes optional. The response in these chapters discipline, power, and safeguard both. Prevention, local intelligence, rumor interdiction, and a rapid takedown with chapter 4's proportionality caveat attached. Because an overbroad clampdown damages the trust, the prevention depends on deterrence, prompt registration, professional investigation, visible prosecution. Name the instruments, the Supreme Court direction in Tehsin Poonawalla 2018 framed as preventive, remedial and punitive measures with district nodal officers, special task forces, fast track trials and a compensation scheme. And the specific mob lynching provision now carried in the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita. Capacity comes to the capacity. The district administration and the station house as first responder. Scene number 7 tested and accountability that runs both ways. Action against dereliction, dereliction by officials, not only against the mob, a direction that binds only the crowd has misread where the failure began. And mob violence is not a breakdown of law and order so much as a demonstration of its absence at the decisive minute and its achieves without any adversary help. The communal polarization that these papers adversaries spend years pursuing. The honest paragraph here is briefly. What is this? Briefly, prevention here shades quickly into surveillance and preemptive restrictions, strong statutory responses can be applied selectively and the deepest cause. The credibility of ordinary justice is not a fixable any security instrument in this chapter. So you have written the paragraph in the examiner is waiting for. Say that. And moving to the 7B scene that is police reform. The prescription that was written and not taken. Scene number 7 gave you the diagnosis. The state police officer has first responded to every threat in this book. Scene 7A gave you what it looks like when that first responder is absent in the decisive minute. Both point at same prescription and it has existed in written form for 20 years. Start with the fact that reframes the whole subject. Police reforms in India is not understudied. It is overstudied and implemented. It is overstudied, under-implemented. The National Police Commission was constituted in 1977 and submitted 8 reports between 79 and 81. The Ribeiro Committee set up 1998 on the Supreme Court's own directions filed to. The Padmanabhaya Committee reported in 2000 with around 240 recommendations. The Malimath Committee on Criminal Justice reported in 2003 with 158. In 2004, Ministry of Home Affairs constituted a review committee which shortlisted 49 recommendations. From all of them as crucial, the fifth head being in the ministry's own words, insulating the police machinery from extraneous influences. Influences. 5 decades, four major bodies, hundreds of recommendations. Then the court acted. Prakash Singh and others versus Union of India, judgment of 22nd September 2006 in writ petition, civil number 310 of 1996. Hearing a petition filed by two retired police chiefs, the Supreme Court issued 7 directives with compliance required by 31st December 2006. Lend them as three groups because grouped they are by memorable listed and they are not. Insulate, professionalize, hold to account. Insulating the force from political direction. Insulating the force from political direction. A state security commission on any of the model recommended by the National Human Rights Commission, the Ribeiro Committee, or the Sorabji Committee, selection of the Director General of Police from among the three senior most officers empaneled for the rank by the Union Public Service Commission with a minimum tenure of police officers on operational duties in practice the Zonal Inspector General, Range Deputy Inspector General, District Superintendent and Station House officers, then professionalizing the work, separation of investigating police from law and order police, beginning with towns of 10 lakh population or more and extending downward so that the officer chasing evidence is not simultaneously managing a procession, procession and a police establishment board to decide transfers, postings, promotions, and other service matters of officers of and below the rank of deputy superintendent, taking the routine transfer of political hands, holding power to account. Holding power to account. A police complaints authority at state and district level for complaints against police officers, and a national security commission at the union level to panel the chiefs of the central police organizations, again with a 2 year tenure, and to review the effectiveness and service conditions of those forces. Now, the structural point that most answers miss, and it is the one line. The first six directives were addressed to the states and union territories. The seventh was readdressed solely to the central government. Remember that scene number 7B's argument turns on it. Alongside the judgment, the Model Police Act, drafted by an expert committee under Soli Sorabji, set up in September 2005, submitted on 30 October 2006, and circulated the states the next day, offered a ready template to replace the Police Act of 1861. Its architecture matched the directives: a state police board, merit-based selection of the DGP, security of tenure, establishment committees, dedicated investigation staff, a distinct cadre of civil as against armed police, and a police welfare bureau covering health, housing, and working hours down to 1 day of a week. So, on the standing committees count, 17 states have either enacted the Model Act and amended their existing police acts, and 31 states and union territories have constituted police complaints authorities at state and district level. And one figure from the same report that belongs in any answer on this subject: women make up about 10.3% of the police force. A force that is 4/5 male and 1/5 empty is not merely under strength. It is unrepresentative of the population it policies, and that tells in one figure. It is unrepresentative of the population it policies, and the and that tells in reporting rates in investigation quality across whole categories of crime and legitimacy. The DGP directive is the one with real machinery, and is worth carrying in detail because it shows that what complaints actually look like when it happens. Eligible officers of ADG rank are above with the required years of service. At least 6 months of residual tenure are sent by the state to the UPSC. A committee chaired by UPSC, including the Union Home Secretary, the State Chief Secretary, the outgoing DGP, and Central Police Organization's chief, return to a panel of three. The state picks one, and the officer holds a two tenure irrespective of the date superannuation. Removal early only for cause. Comes to the data anchor part, the capacity picture, data, police organization, BPR&D, sanctioned strength, vacancies, more than sanctioned post in 5 stands empty. Cybercrime police stations, increasing. Comes to budget 2026-2026. One caveat in the middle figure, that is kind of caveat marks careful answer. Monitoring cells were not counted separately before this series began. They sat inside cybercrime police stations. So part of this rise reflects units being separated out into the accounts of, as well as units being created. Come to the budget 2026-27, 4,061 crore for modernization of police forces, 5393 crore for police infrastructure. One caution that will separate your answer from the coaching notes version. You will see a claim that the United Nations recommends 222 police for 1 lakh population. There is no such UN standard. It does not appear in the UN standards and norms on crime prevention and criminal justice. And researchers who have looked for it have found nothing. The triple two figure is India's own sanction ratio, which has been relabeled over the years. Right sanctioned against actual instead. It is defensible and it is a harder number. One institution to name while you are here, because the scene has been describing capacity without saying who builds it. The Bureau of Police Research and Development, the ministry's nodal body for police training and modernization. And the source of data on police organizations, figure above, an annual series since 1986, issued by the Ministry and Niti Aayog. The Standing Committee's 2022 report asked to prepare common minimum training module for all states, which tells you the standard. It is still not common, and borrow one formulation from the National Police Mission, run under BPR and D. So because it is quotable and it names the half of reform, the directives cannot reach. It is stated objectives include specialization in counter-terrorism, counter-insurgency, cybercrime, cybercrime and economic offenses. The syllabus of this very marathon and alongside them a shift from force psychology to service psychology. Hold that against scene 7b's argument, that is, structural insulation is what a court can order. A change of self, a change of a change of self understanding from force to service is what no court can order and what no statute can draft. That is why police reform has a judicial half and a cultural half, and why the second one has no deadline. Read the second anchor line as the deeper argument. Cyber crime stations nearly doubled and monitoring cells rose by half in 4 years. The constabulary is being asked to become several different professions at once on a strength that one fifth empty. That is the capacity case, and it is real, but capacity is only half of the answer, and the weaker half follow what happened after the judgment, because the sequence is argument. In January 2007, the court found it necessary to classify its own directives. DGP selection and tenure, minimum tenure for operational officers, and police establishment board were declared self-executory to be complied with within 4 weeks. No legislation required. The remaining three state directives got until March. In 2008, the court appointed a monitoring committee under Justice K.T. Thomas to examine states' compliance affidavits against ground realities. Its report was circulated in 2010. The matter has remained before the court since. A court does not classify its own orders as a self-executory and then appoint a committee to check whether they are executed unless it suspects they will not be. Now handle the counter evidence honestly, because it is the mark of strong answer. On paper, compliance looks substantial. 17 states have legislated, 31 states and union territories have constituted complaints authorities. If the directives had simply been ignored, those numbers would be near zero. They are not, which is precisely the point, and it is a sharper one. The resistance did not take form of refusal. It took the form of compliance in the form and not in the substance. State police legislation enacted after the judgment repeatedly makes a state security commissions advisory rather than binding, writes, writes exigency clauses into fixed tenure that restore discretionary transfer at will, and leaves police complaints authorities without independent investigative staff their findings recommendatory only. Each of those is a drafting choice made by a legislature after a judgment that told it what to build. A body that has been constituted but cannot compel not to a reform. It is a different thing wearing in the name of one. Now the fact that completes the argument, and it is one of the one to carry into the hall. The center did not comply either. The seventh directive, the National Security Commission, was the one addressed to union government alone. Instead of constituting it, the government set up a committee on national security and central police personnel welfare chaired by the Home Minister, the National Security Advisor, Cabinet Secretary, Home Secretary, and Director of the Intelligence Bureau. The Supreme Court recorded that it was not satisfied with the central government's compliance. The union then applied for modification of the direction, and that application has still not been disposed of years later. The single fact rescue, the single fact rescues the argument from partisanship. This is not state resisting Delhi. This is executive at both levels across parties declaring an installation it was ordered to build. The same institution that asked the states to give up control posting did not surrender to own hold who was the central forces. The parietal implementation of the Prakash Singh directives is better understood as a settled political equilibrium than as an administrative failure. The reforms that were diluted are precisely the ones that would have transferred control over postings, tenure, and accountability away from the executive. And the union's own record that on the one directive addressed to is the proof that this is not state versus center story. The honest paragraph is the counter case deserves a hearing too. Police is a state subject, and a judicially imposed template on a state legislature raises a genuine federal question. The same question seen five raised about central agencies arriving from the opposite direction, and insulation is not the same as accountability. A force fully insulated from the elected government still has to answer to someone. The defensible position is not maximal insulation but the playing. Pairing this chapter has argued throughout the operational autonomy matched by real external accountability, which is the one combination almost no state has legislated. The closing frame here, power and safeguard. The honest paragraph here is the marathon's last. That is, every instrument in this chapter lives on a line. UAPA between security and liberty, AFSPA between operational protection and impunity, central agencies between coordination and federal encroachment, survival and grids between awareness and privacy. The immature answer picks a side. The mature answer states the principle of this entire marathon has practiced. Security powers are legitimate when they are necessary, proportionate, overseen, and reviewable. And every safeguard named in this chapter, judiciary scrutiny, periodic review, sanction with accountability, calibrated withdrawal, is that principle made procedure. A democracy's security machinery is judged twice by whether it defeats the threat and by whether it remains worth defending while doing so. India's evolving framework building prosecution capability while progressively withdrawing extraordinary powers where conditions permit is the attempt to pass both tests at once. Comes to scene number 9, that is PYQ 2023 security challenges and the central agencies, 2019 UAPA NIA Act amendments and oppositions, 2015 AFSPA, 2017 mob violence causes and consequences. So these are the question asked in previously. So three direct questions in 13 years under this head, and every one of them pairs the missionary with its critics. That is not accident of phrasing. It is the examiner telling you what a good answer on security powers look like. Probable question for mains 2026 is India's security architecture rests on integrated agencies, network databases, and technology enforced processor. Examine and discuss the safeguards needed. So, what should be the answer? The power and safeguard frame. This question. Map the machinery in three columns: intelligence fusion, investigation, forces on the state subject key. Then show the digitized spine CCTNS, ICJS, NAFIS, and new criminal laws arriving as software. Then for any statute to ask to give power and debate in equal measure. So UAPS amendments and their opposition, NIS expansion and federal question. Then move to AFSPA sections and quotes two markers and the calibrated withdrawal update. Then move to close every answer on the principle necessary, proportionate, overseen, reviewable. This is the chapter number 15. What is the marathon? So 15 chapters, one syllabus, one way of thinking. Name the threat precisely, map the response honestly. Map the response honestly, concede the gap candidly, and close on the principle. Do that in hall, and this paper is yours. 15 chapters, one syllabus, one way of thinking. What is the way of thinking? Name the threat precisely, map the response honestly, concede the gap candidly, and close on the principle. Do that in hall, and this paper is yours. With this, I completed GS3 internal security. Thank you.